This video is sponsored by Raycon. Since I've been on a bit of a sci-fi horror binge these last few months, I think now is a good time to look back at one of the weirder genre anomalies of the 21st century. 2000's Pitch Black was a low-key, moderately budgeted sci-fi horror that you've likely come across at some point in your life, whether you remember its initial theatrical release, saw it late one night on television, randomly rented it on DVD, or perhaps you're part of its enthusiastic cult following. For such an obscure original IP that released to a relatively timid shrug on critical shoulders, Pitch Black was a surprisingly decent commercial success that somehow had enough lasting appeal to spawn an unlikely franchise, which its creator David Twohy is apparently still working on to this day. There is a lot to be said about this bizarrely unique franchise. It was never a mainstream moneymaker, nor did it survive on any deserved acclaim in my opinion. It just seemed to float by on pure cult recognition within niche pop culture circles. Hell, having watched the movies and played the games myself, the only thing clear and consistent about it is Vin Diesel's mysterious anti-hero Riddick. Now, I don't want to stray too far away from the main topic of Pitch Black, so I'm not going to cover anything specific about the Chronicles of Riddick, but from what I remember, it just wasn't my thing. It felt like an even more boring and pretentious version of Dune. In fact, after the Chronicles of Riddick failed to recoup its $105 million budget, it wasn't until nearly a decade later did we get a requel of sorts that practically retread the same setup as Pitch Black, long before requels were even a thing. Although my opinion on that one is pretty much the same as the one I have for Pitch Black, but minus the captivating mystery and unintentional campiness of early 2000s filmmaking. The video games, however, are legitimately fantastic and perfectly expand on the positive aspects of Pitch Black, whilst maintaining a tone and allure that was faithful to who Riddick is as a character. I actually recommend RagnarRox video on Escape from Butcher's Bay for a better understanding of where I'm coming from, so I've left a link in the description box below. Anyway, Pitch Black tells the story of a passenger spaceship that collides with meteor fragments that cause it to crash land on a mysterious desert planet inhabited by these pterodactyl alien vulture bats that only emerge in darkness due to their hypersensitivity to sunlight. But upon discovering the devoured corpses of human researchers and realizing that the planet's 3 suns will soon be eclipsed, the surviving passengers urgently voyage into the barren unknown in search of another ship to escape this seemingly dying planet. Now, I will inevitably miss so many details, so please make sure to leave your thoughts and observations in the comments below. Perhaps like the video if you enjoy it, consider subscribing and maybe supporting the show on Patreon, and just before we go any further, here is a quick word from this video sponsor, Raycon. So I've began taking my mornings a whole lot slower by listening to some positive music on Spotify and plugging in my Raycon everyday earbuds to soothe my mind as I make my morning coffee. It's my new way of energizing myself before I get to business making these videos, and with Raycon's instantaneous connection, comfortable lightweight feel, and brilliant sound quality, it makes for a seamless and leisurely experience. In fact, over the last week I've been recovering from a leg injury I got from international dodgeball training, and it's thanks to Raycon's optimized gel tips to stop my earbuds from falling out even during explosive movements that I'm able to keep myself focused and distracted during the most strenuous of physio exercises. Seriously, without music, I'd probably get lazy with my recovery. Raycons also offer 8 hours of playtime and a 32-hour battery life thanks to their charging case, which is handy for me because I notoriously forget to plug things in before bed, and despite starting at half the price of other premium audio brands, Raycon still look, feel, and sound better than ever. With over 48,000 5-star reviews and a 30-day happiness guarantee, why not get a pair for yourself by simply clicking the link in the description box below or going to buyraycon.com/Ryan to get 15% off your order. And now, back to the video. At its core, Pitch Black is a fairly generic survival tale masked in an unrelenting uncertainty that persists long after the movie's over. While Riddick naturally takes up most of the discussion when this movie is brought up, it's more so that he becomes this pervasive symbol of why exactly Pitch Black stands out as so unique amongst other Escape from Alien Planet style films, as well as its overindulgent spin-off. Pitch Black is a near-perfect demonstration of tangible mystique, in that, aside from just being a tense and exciting creature feature, you'll likely spend most of your time trying to piece together the small nuggets of information you gather from character interactions and visual clues that build up this unusual, complex, and sometimes frightening world that we never really see. It's the epitome of a less is more type film. Much like Ridley Scott's Alien, its dystopian future is organically delivered in an uncontrived way, and because we never get clear answers to our many questions, it naturally leaves us wanting more. That's what I meant when I said Pitch Black had lasting appeal. It feeds on your curiosity. Yes, it will probably divide audiences because there are those who understandably want those answers, but then there's folks like me who prefer engaging with the unknown. To me, it creates this craving that answers will ultimately never satisfy. For example, there's a brief scene where the characters discover what I thought looked like mammoth dinosaur bones, and it's never really addressed, and then later in the film, it's shown that the pterodactyl creatures eat each other, but again, it's a detail that the film doesn't stop to reflect upon. As such, you can interpret that information any way you want. My theory was that it's a dying planet where the food chain has devolved to cave-dwelling bats struggling to adapt to extinction, and like with the real animal kingdom, some animals turn on their own when survival becomes absolute desperation. Weirdly enough, it actually reminded me of the Time Machine adaptation from 2002, where the main villains in that story evolved into these cave-dwelling creatures as a result of adapting to their dying ecosystem. Hell, at one point, I was thinking it was going to be some Planet of the Apes type shit, where it would reveal they traveled through a time-traveling wormhole to a future Earth or something like that, because it would heighten that initial sense of desolation of a small group of travelers floating through space. I mean, maybe the film does explain this and I just missed the entire point, but either way, I love that it leaves you to just ponder over all these small details without much context. Like, there's this one character who's a smug antiquity dealer transporting rare, expensive artifacts. It's so randomly specific, but it's quirky world-building garnish like that makes it a much more rich film than if it were just generic military buff dudes or something like that. Now, moving along to some of the finer details, this is a movie I think appropriately fits the description of dated to some degree, because the CGI does stand out as a bit iffy, but it is forgivable given its budget and how it makes use of its limitations. When we're in the darkness, the film is at its very best because it is genuinely well shot. I mean, there is some chiaroscuro level artistry to the use of light and shadow, especially when it comes to presenting Riddick. However, what was supposed to be my big smug genius comparison turned out to be a fairly common observation when I decided to Google it out of curiosity, and that was how much of the film immaculately embodies the work of John Carpenter. For example, Blunt Magazine compared Riddick as being like Snake Plissken from Escape from New York meets MacReady from The Thing, which is just a fantastic way to consolidate his character arc, but then genre critic John Kenneth Muir, who I've actually referenced before, went even further and wrote an extensive analysis on how Riddick fits within the anti-hero formula of John Carpenter's universe. So I'm kinda shit out of luck here. To give you a broad insight to what I mean, Carpenter films are infamously inconsequential and minimalistic. They're isolated incidents that have little to no true impact on the world around them. They're small stories within greater universes, and generally start in the middle of things, let's say. Pitch Black is more or less exactly the same structure. There are no real high stakes to the conflict. There is nothing to lose in the grand scheme of things. But since we're put in the shoes of these characters and we grow an intimate connection with them, the stakes become personally urgent. Granted, one of my issues with the film is that some obvious characters exist to merely perish, but you could say that they also serve an emotional component to other characters' relationship with the conflict. For example, Keith David plays a preacher whose followers die one by one, causing him to doubt his faith in God's mysterious ways, whereas to me, the most prominent one is the real hero of the story, Caroline Fry, but we'll come back to her later because her arc is arguably, if not more, interesting than Riddick's. The last major character in the story, William, is initially quite a curious personality. However, unfortunately, I think he suffers from having the twist to his character given away far too early into the story. William Johns is the obligatory combative bravado sheriff initially established to be transporting Riddick to prison, but before the main event even begins, Riddick unloads this big twist onto Caroline by revealing that William is in fact a bounty hunter who suffers from a morphine addiction after Riddick nearly killed him in a previous altercation. I understand the twist exists to generate more tension and doubt between characters, but in my opinion, it's the one time that the film uses an exposition dump that could have been more organically delivered like everything else up to that point. And then, of course, you have Riddick, who I won't spend a tremendous amount of time on because everybody talks about him, but there is a reason for it. He is undeniably the star of the show. There's a quality to Vin Diesel's portrayal of Riddick that unearths a charm that's super difficult to pull off with a character so outwardly hostile. All we truly learn about Riddick is that he killed a lot of people. Maybe he's an assassin, a serial killer, covert super soldier, who gives a shit, because since we don't know much about him, there is an unceasing tension to what he might be up to. He's more like a pure predator, a ghost. Hell, I struggle to believe he's even human, especially with the one particular detail about his surgically shined eyes that allow him to see vividly in the dark at the expense of sensitivity to light. It's not exactly a subtle observation to say he's basically presented as a duality to the creatures, given he mimics their behavior and appears even more threatening in darkness, further emphasizing him as something animalistic, while Diesel's performance continues to humanize him. It's that powerfully distinct synergy between the two extremes that allow him to perfectly weave between Carpenter antihero and, well, borderline Michael Myers, since we're sticking to the comparison. He's cold and fearless, but not necessarily impenetrable, because later into the story he does show us glimmers of morality, but never enough to think he's ever going to prove himself the good guy. He's perpetually nefarious, even toying with his prey, assuming that at any point he might just abandon them to their dire fate. Hell, he nearly does, until Caroline convinces him to show some moral responsibility to those who are essentially weaker than him. Vin Diesel impressively pushes the limit of what trust between people really is. We never know what Riddick is thinking, and his wit and charisma is so manipulative that I genuinely could not guess the outcome. I truly bought into the idea that he was just going to abandon the group when starting the ship without lights, but what throws an emotional spanner in the works is Caroline, who becomes the tragic underdog hero. I think it's easy to underestimate how important Caroline is to the story, given Riddick practically overshadows everybody, but when you really dig into her character arc, it's surprisingly complex. Caroline is established as the ship's reluctant docking pilot, who slowly begins to take on responsibility when the group seek leadership on their journey to the escape ship. Yet, what is significant about the opening is that when the ship is damaged by the Meteor fragments, Caroline initially attempts to dump the passengers in order to reduce significant weight that would prevent the ship from crashing. However, her captain and mentor of sorts, Greg Owens, who dies soon after crash landing, prevents her from committing such a morally devastating act, eventually leading her to the realization that she is ultimately responsible for the fates of these people. She later tells Riddick she'd even die for them after growing attached to their safety. Thus, she goes from seeing them as purely cargo to genuine people who need help. She basically strengthens into a character seeking some form of moral redemption for her guilt for nearly killing these people to begin with. If at least one of them survives, she'll see that as some victory, considering that, ironically, without her eventual help, they would have all perished anyway. I'll admit that it's a relatively underdeveloped arc given the focus shifts to Riddick, so when she does get killed and becomes a literal sacrifice to prompt Riddick into fulfilling her goal, it doesn't hit as hard as it could have. Although it still surprised me in a rather subversive way, because when I first saw this film when I was young, I was so used to the hero typically getting away, and was left genuinely jaw-dropped when she got pulled away into the darkness. I mean, I half expected her to come back, much like Riddick when he nearly abandoned the group earlier in the film, but looking at it now, it tragically fits with her character as she goes from cold self-preservation to quite directly putting herself in harm's way for the sake of those around her. In all, Pitch Black remains a strange but entertaining anomaly. Sure, it doesn't do anything outright original or groundbreaking, but in execution, it shows a remarkable restraint in giving you a self-contained creature feature that had yet to succumb to the weight of its eventual ambition. Once again, thank you so much for watching. If I missed anything, please tell me about it in the comments below, and until next time, stay safe, stay away from desert alien planets, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye!